Let's see, what should I work on next? Whatever it is, I'm sure I'll find inspiration in my big bag of garbage. Now, I've kind of been craving a pirate ship lately, so we'll start with something that's already in ship shape. Ooh, like this egg. And it already looks fit for a pirate, though it's not quite the right captain.
Bad form!
Because the ship we're making today must be fit for the future king of pirates. We're making the...
Going Meringo de gozaimasu.
Though there's a couple holes in this hull, and I have no flex tape to seal it up. But after a couple dabs of hot glue, she's seaworthy enough to sail the East Blue. And once we gather up all of the crew, it's time to ship out. First, this egg needs a good sanding to prepare it for glue and wood siding. And for the other side, I'm too lazy to build an interior, so let's seal up the inner quarters with a sheet of foam. Done. Oh, except just kidding, I spoke too soon, because we need to add some booty to this hull to act as a ballast, which will add some stability in the sea. Someone sent me their prized bounty of bottle caps and the One Piece, which will keep the Going Merry properly balanced. Now, I'm not building a ship in a bottle, so why not put this bottle in the ship? I want the clear plastic bodice of this bottle, but to get access, we'll need to decapitate it. And as always, a wet sanding is best to keep the plastic dust down. Then we're left with this lovely swath of clear plastic that we can use to rough out the remaining shapes and structure of the Going Merry. Like the stern, which has an aesthetic swoop up to the poop deck. And after plugging that hole with some paperboard, we can now turn to the bow, which needs an extension. A quick little plunder into my dome zone yielded this thin and flexible hemisphere.
Drop this.
Thank you. I'm cutting out a pizza slice, which will give this dome more versatility around the Going Merry's oblong egg body. Then we'll trim the excess dome, making sure to leave just enough of a sidewall to house the cannon deck, including a window for where the cannon will peek out from. Now we'll start building the actual ship decks. I think I'm just going to wing it with some paperboard, but I really wish I had a plan. Oh, I do. A couple rectangles to enclose the gun deck and storage room that we'll never have access to. But as for the bow, there is some slight visibility from the front cannon window, so this floor needs some boards. Now just a thin layer of glue will do. A quick haircut to trim the bangs from this deck, then we'll slot this little hemisphere sub-level. But because it's going to be hidden behind walls and impossible to paint later, we'll need to stain the wood now using my favorite method of mineral spirits and oil paint.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
Resting atop this sloppy floor, there is canonically a cannon, which I'll make from one of these. You'll no doubt recognize this as the tip from the classic Bic 0.7mm mechanical pencil. What a workhorse. And after a few beads and a little mount, it's hopefully unrecognizable as just the tip of a pencil and instead looks like the threatening business end of the Going Merry, which in my recollection, I scarcely remember it even being used aside from shooting at a nice whale one time.
Hey, but a scratch.
The walls and ceiling are painted black to shroud the room in darkness and conceal an unfinished interior, and we'll call the gun deck good. Then, to smooth out the uneven hull, I'm spreading out a big dollop of goop with my finger. If I could eat the goop fruit, you know I would, but modeling paste is just fine for now. On the main deck, we'll place a hole for where the future mast will go. Then I'm using my glue squirt attack to lay out all of the floorboards. Glue can warp paperboard, so a little extra weight will hold the boards flat. Now, I could keep laying out individual planks for the ship's siding, but I just remembered I have this full sheet of balsa wood, so I'm not going to. Because why use mini woods when one would work good? But don't you worry me buccos, because I'm still going to be engraving the board with 1,000 lines to imply the wood paneled look. After installing this siding, we'll get back to the decks, where I'm suddenly feeling the urge to poop. Deck, that is. A little freehand swoop around the poop, and a chunk removed for the 2 stairways that flank the galley means this deck is ready to go. And let's not forget to pre-board the underside. Let's see, how many more sequences of me laying out coffee stirring stick floorboards would you like to see? Let's just eat the wood fruit and skip through the rest. Alright, top deck done. And as above, so below does the wood go. For the ship's siding, I need an extra thin sheet of balsa wood.
It's only a wafer thin.
We'll need about 9 inches of wood to cover the Going Merry toe to tip. First, we'll start with slicing out a handful of homemade regulation size coffee stirrers. But where these differ from league standard stirring sticks is their flexibility, which is important because ships are famously curved. Everything was going pretty well until I realized a completely straight stick can't wrap around an egg body, which is maybe something I could have learned if I had studied under a shipwright shaped like an egg. So in order to get the boards to wrap correctly around the front of the bow, I'm slicing off a tiny sliver on each board. It wasn't perfect, but because balsa is pretty squishy, I was able to force the boards together as I went along. There are several areas that revealed a real Usopp slop craftsmanship. Sorry for the Usopp slander, but it was nothing a little wood filler couldn't hide. And once we border up all the way to the bottom of the hull where the keel will overlap, we'll just flip it over and do it again. Oh, it's done. We'll apply the same technique to the stern where the rudder will attach. Then we'll take a micro break from wood because this balsa wood is very crumbly and I can feel the micro slivers deeply penetrating my lungs.
Wear a mask.
Just a few final bits for the starboard and port boarding gaps, and then we'll need something to build a galley. Like this sheet of dollar store foam board. Now, I've been studying the blade a long time, so I don't recommend 3 craft blade style unless you don't care about your teeth.
Your bones have got to be nothing but dust at this point!
And the nice thing about this dollar store foam board is the paper backing peels off super clean. Super clean. Super clean. And there's the galley, though it should be a bit taller. A little bit more. Maybe 1 more. Perfect. But not quite perfect because these hideous sides must be hidden away under layers of wood panels. Then for the roof, which is also a floor, coffee stirring sticks. A little glue squirt to lather up the galley and prepare it for boards. But the galley also needs porthole windows, in which I learned large drill bits and balsa wood do not mix. Since I'm allergic to making interiors, there's nothing to see if you look through these windows. It's just the inside of these metal studs. And we mustn't ignore the door, which is really just a false door glued over a wall Looney Tunes style.
I see the problem. Oh, do ya?
Here's a wood disc I bought that came with free cheese. Honestly, this is some of the best craft wood I've ever used. It's like a thin plywood sheet, so it's strong in both directions. And it's sturdy, yet easy enough to cut with a craft blade. 10 out of 10. With the deck trim done on the top of the galley, does that mean this is ready for its home on the Going Merry? Not yet, because we have several staircases to knock out first. XPS foam is my medium of choice. The stairway is already complete within the foam block. I just have to chisel away the superfluous material. Then with some wood skin, it's done. One of the staircases houses a storage closet, so it needs a door that goes absolutely nowhere and is purely for aesthetics. Alright, let's slot these stairs into their respective zones. Since the Going Merry is primarily made of wood, I'm using wood for all of the various wood details, which was working pretty well until I arrived at the white trim areas of the ship. These parts move in curly, swirly directions and would be hard to replicate with real wood. So, we'll make fake wood using the old trick of carving strips of XPS foam with wood grain. But once they're painted up later, it should look fine unless you're looking closely for my wood. I glued the faux wood foam to the ship, then moved on to the trickiest section, which were these little cloud-like curls that appear in various places. In the lore of One Piece, spirals are a reoccurring motif, so I wanted to do right by the Going Merry. The first spiral is this double-ended snail shell that scoops under the poop deck. Then it's joined by its brother on the bow, another little Ouroboros snail spiral, which leads us into another curvaceous section, a big wavy beam that will support the Going Merry's figurehead, aka Luffy's special seat, which we'll get to later in this video. That leaves only a few pieces of faux wood foam strapping the Merry together, such as the keel, and these iron straps that strap all the way around the hull. Before moving back up to the deck, the Going Merry needs a couple gun ports, which I'll leave as a black void until we arm them later. As we swoop around the poop, we'll need some sort of railing, and for the rail posts, I'll forgive you for thinking these are toothpicks, because these are fancy toothpicks. We'll clip off the decorative end, leaving us with a cup of fancy and a handful of lesser toothpicks that are now inferior to their fancy cohort. These posts need to wrap around each deck, which means making a bunch of evenly spaced holes and then filling each hole with one of these fancy bits. Okay, time to do that 50 more times.
Just fill the hole filler.
Now, it wasn't until filling these holes with fancy toothpicks that I actually started to like the thing I was building, which is kind of a common theme for me. It takes about 75% of a build to stop lamenting that it looks like garbage. Up until this point, it was just a big wooden egg, but now that it has rails, I can start to imagine a tiny crew walking along these decks. I attribute most of this transformation to these fancy toothpicks, and speaking of fancy, the rails also feature a few exquisite spirals capping off each deck, which is just a flat piece of foam rolled into a spiral. Uh-oh, I just realized this iron strap needs rivets. Luckily, someone meticulously removed all of the bristles from their hairbrush and sent them to me. Each bristle features a very deluxe rivet that looks especially formulated for shipbuilding. And I'm no shipwright, but it looks pretty right to me. Another feature that would make this ship right is an anchor. So let's once again tear up this balsa with a drill bit. But this time using a step drill bit sent to me by a friend after watching me struggle in previous videos. We'll anchor this hole later, so we'll be adrift at sea until we give this ship a rudder, which of course has no ability to actually steer because this ship is tillerless with a rudder locked in one position. And with that, let's slap some paint all over this thing. I'm using acrylic paint for all of the non-wood and the faux wood foam, but for all the parts that are actually wood, it's time to mix up a stain using all of my favorite browns. I contemplated just slapping the whole thing in one shade of all-purpose brown, but there are actually subtleties in the browns of the deck, the hull, and the wall panels of the galley, which each use darker shades of brown in that order. Does it come through in the final paint job? Nope, not really at all, but it's something I thought about with good intentions. The trim is painted up in various creams, beiges, and topped with an eggshell white, which is a perfect segue into the egg-shaped head of the Going Merry. Or more accurately, Luffy's seat. Were I to have made this at a different scale, I could have just used an actual chicken egg as the head, but I need something a little smaller. Perfect. We'll start by engraving all of the face details because I don't trust myself to be able to freehand paint a face on a smooth surface. Then, continuing the swirly curly theme of the Going Merry, I'm rolling up these long foam cones into a pair of ram horns. Once they're glued to the egg head, all that's left for this figurehead is to paint within the lines, which was still hard for my unsteady hand, but at least the pupils still came out decently round and not as much of a fright as an actual sheep.
Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Merry's neck needs to be extra strong. So I'm running some metal armature wire through the foam, which slides in smooth like butter.
Oops.
All it took was a little goop to stuff in her broken neck hole, and we're back in business. With these neck bones, she can run straight into Labubu without losing her head. After attaching the rudder, the ship itself is complete, leaving arguably the two most important holes to be filled. In my wood box, I have many mast-shaped rods, including a honey dipping wand, which is part of a complete balanced breakfast.
You want honey? You got it.
Honey!
And these tiny planter pots from Dylan will make a perfect base for the main mast. From there, I am building up to the top of the mast using various rods with a smaller radius each time, and you know we love a changing radii around here. Just like the top of these chopsticks, which come to a final satisfying point to cap off the main mast. Next, I'm attaching the yard, which is the horizontal beam that supports the sail, though this isn't much of a beam, it's more of a stick. A yardstick? Since this looks like a big old chopstick, it needs these iron straps to show it's holding its girth together to really sell the scale, along with some rope to hold the beams together. The problem is this twine is way too hairy, but after a quick pass of almost burning my house down, it looks much better as scale rope. Until I started actually using it and tying it into knots around the mast, because unfortunately that seemed to reactivate some of the hairs. But after one more pass of cleanup fire, the roped up beam was looking smooth. All that was left to do now was that whole process one more time, and we're ready to stain the whole thing Brown Town. At the top of the mast is the crow's nest, and I came up with this brilliant idea of using a changing radii toothpaste cap as a form to mount all of the vertical boards. And since the cap is made of smooth plastic, there's no chance the super glue will be able to stick to it, and I should be able to slide off the crow's nest really easily without any damage, is something I thought before actually trying this. Because in practice, this was real jank and I ended up with a very battle-damaged crow's nest. Though after some quick repairs, we can drown this crown in brown and do a little dry fit test with the two masts, the second of which was made off camera. That leads us to the main event, the main sail and the Straw Hat Crew's Jolly Roger. Now, I mostly have plastic garbage in my junk treasure chest, but I must have something I can use for the sail. Oh, right here. Perfect. I'm gluing this rectangle to a temporary dowel to add some structure, which should make painting easier, but it's still too floppy, so how about a bath in watery PVA glue? Once it's fully saturated in the cream, if I just leave it hanging out, it's going to dry a crusty, lumpy mess, and I want it to be perpetually held in a wind-filled sail position, so I'm strapping it to this wind-filled sail-shaped bottle a friend gave me. Now, there's no time to waste, so let's set this up to dry and come back later.
1 piece later.
Oh yeah, that passes the crisp test. And while we're at it, we'll do the same thing with the sail that flies off the lantine rig as attached to the mizzen mast, which turns the scrim rod around the clap kiln. And as you can see, me hearties, this particular sail is ribbed for our pleasure to simulate the multiple strips of fabric sewn together. Once the glue skin is dry, I'm trimming each sail to its proper size because this fabric really likes to fray on the edges without glue holding it together. And now that each sail is mounted and prepped for straps with some miscellaneous jewelry loops, it's time to break out the paint and fly the colors of the Straw Hat Crew. This is where the glue skin glaze really comes in handy when painting on fabric. I'm essentially painting on a layer of plastic instead of a sponge that would have soaked up these basic acrylics and bled all over the place. The line work would have been nasty without it. For something as simple and iconic as the Straw Hat logo, I was kinda nervous about messing it up. It's not always so straightforward making a one-to-one copy of something. But by starting with a pencil sketch and erasing dozens of bad attempts, it all came together in the end. This fabric is pretty opaque, so after finishing one Jolly Roger, we just have to paint one exact copy on the other side. Now it's time to attach the sail. See all of those ropes tied around each beam for mounting this? Those are just for decoration, so I'll tie a couple new knots to keep this in place while super glue does the rest of the heavy lifting. And that won't be the last of the rigging, so I'm adding more points on the crow's nest to secure a few support lines. More rigging to come in a sec, but first, we've been lost at sea for quite a while now, and I'm pretty sure we all have scurvy. Luckily, Nami keeps a grove of vitamin C enriched tangerines just for that occasion. Guess everyone gets to keep their scurvy. Believe it or not, that's a tangerine. Once we flatten it out and squirt a little orange on this clay to mix up some tangerine clay. First, we'll roll it into a new flavor of squishy Cheeto before baking 100 tiny tangerines in the oven. This is far more than we'll need, but that's because I wanted to get a taste of this ice cream of the future. Speaking of ice cream, oof, this gelato has gone bad. But a few nugs of this craft foam will make a lovely little grove of trees for this bounty of citrus. These stemless tangerines are ready to sprout from the tree with a little dab of super glue, and then we'll plant this grove on top of the galley. Speaking of the galley, the final detail is to finish up the porthole windows with a tiny rounded drop of UV resin cured with UV light. And you'll know it's done when it passes the tap test. Now that we can finally install the galley and the 2 sails, it's time for the rest of the rigging, which I'm really fretting. Because if there's one thing I've learned from model ship YouTube, it's that
the deepest circle of hell is reserved for betrayers and mutineers.
And those that mess up or skimp on the rigging. Luckily, I have the power of fiction and anime on my side, so the Going Mary's rigging is fairly simple and nowhere near as complex as some actual historical ships, because who wants to draw 1,000 ropes in every panel? Even still, for as simple as these rat lines were, it was a real pain trying to space and tie this many tiny knots with sausage fingers getting in the way. For the rigging itself, I just kind of stumbled upon this waxed cord at the craft store, which apparently is how these things are actually done in Tiny Ship World. Maybe it was the spirit of Klabautermann guiding me, for which I am most thankful because this rope holds knots and poses very nicely. After attaching a few more jewelry loops, this thing is totally rigged. But there's something missing on the poop deck. A final cannon for enemies approaching from the rear. Like the rest of the ship's artillery, the poop cannon is made of a smattering of beads, but this one is mounted on a popsicle stick, pre-stained with cherry flavor and pre-licked by someone that sent me all of their trash. The drill is not friendly to these single-purpose sticks. Should have just stuck to manual hole drilling, but we got there in the end. Then lastly, a few wheels to roll this puppy around upon the poop. Now, this video is almost over, but I know what you're all thinking. Where's my contractually obligated horseshoe? But did you know a horseshoe when bent slightly outward becomes a perfect ship anchor? Oh no. Well, the centipede will curse me for sure if I waste this horseshoe, so we're just gonna have to roll with it and use the 2 halves to make a hole. I'm gluing this bisected horseshoe on the sides of a side blade, and then capping off each end with this lethal looking plastic arrow pick. Astute viewers will recognize these from many moons ago when I bought 1,000 of them for a Luigi's Mansion video, and I still have about 1,000 left. We'll slap on a quick metal sheen, then safely stow this horseshoe amalgamation up on the bow. But this wouldn't be a legal pirate ship unless it was flying its Jolly Roger here and here. So we'll need some black fabric for these flags. Nylon has a nice thread density and it's flexible enough to add some wind ripples once hardened with glue. From this crispy spandex wafer, we'll only need 2 small flags and a few straw hat logos, or 50 just in case you have no idea what scale you need. Then, after laminating these logos to the leggings with a few layers of Mod Podge, we'll secure them to the masts with a tiny dab of super glue, which means this ship is done. If it could stand. So we'll build a stand using the nondescript side of this wooden coaster, and one of these mystery items which might be the long-lost cousin of the infamous pizza table. And with that, the Going Mary is ready to sail the East Blue, by which I mean it's ready to sit on this stand and go nowhere. A special thanks to all me buccos that support me on Patreon. I am continually grateful that you let me plunder your booty. And without further ado, roll the booty shots.
だな